Thank you, Amber. All right, thank you for those that put in the chat where you're from and what you're doing. Department of Education, Webster, welcome, White River, all over. Awesome. On your screen now, you should see a link or actually, I'm going to drop it into the chat for everybody to see. You can click it right there. Let's see. Sure you have the right one. You can access the link to Nearpod. What you'll need to do is open up a separate browser window, and then you'll be able to click on this link right here that you see in the chat. Another way to get to the Nearpod link is also going to join.nearpod.com and then entering that code. But it's also easier to kind of grab it from the chat box. You can also do it from a separate device, a phone or an iPad, but you can also just do it through the browser window. And it'll be the presentation that we'll go through, and you'll have a chance to interact with the material. Of course, we do have the chat as well, but there are some different ways to interact through the Nearpod as well. So just let me know if you do have any issues in the chat getting into the Nearpod, but we will, you can just access it right there. We'll see who's in here. Okay, good. We got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, about 14 people in there. I know we have about 23 or so people, so I'll wait a little bit more. I'm also going to share. You should be able to see the screen. So I'm also going to share the screen. So if you can't, for some reason, access the Nearpod, you will see the screen as we navigate through it. You won't be able to participate in the portion in which you can interact, but you will be able to see the screen. All right. Looks like we have quite a few people in here, so we'll get started. All right, so this is kind of the agenda for today. It's really just to kind of talk about where I am in my personal journey in learning about racial equity specifically, but also just to explore some resources I've come across that have helped me, and then really give you a chance to explore some of those resources, and to kind of at the end we'll have a chance to kind of commit to maybe 2 or 3 things that you'll be doing, or you'll have a chance to be able to explore and commit to doing either by yourself, with yourself, or with students or your own children. So I'm just going to do a quick poll, and just know all these polls and these collaboration decks that you'll see are all anonymous. So when you do answer these, nobody will see your name attached to them. So it's just a quick poll. If you could answer it, kind of where are you in your journey to understanding and creating racial equity? So is it you're just beginning? Have you started reading some books around it? Or are you really actively seeking opportunities to explore how to make your world, personal and professional, more equitable? So give everybody a second to kind of answer that. Good, few more people. All right, so I'll share that so you can kind of see. All right, so you should see we are about in the middle. About half of us are kind of reading, exploring resources, wanting to know more, and some are actively finding opportunities to explore that, and some are just beginning, and we're all over the place, and that is totally okay. All right, so I won't spend too much on this slide because I got a great introduction from Amber, but I do live in San Antonio now, and I'll go over a little bit about my experiences that touch on Puerto Rico, Spain, and New York City a little bit. But I do have 3 young boys. They keep me busy, but it's a lot of fun. All right. So just to give some context and background, I, growing up in South Dakota, I wasn't really exposed to other racial or cultural backgrounds. I grew up with people who looked like me, and I didn't really have an opportunity to engage in conversations around race. Now, when I think about where my kids go to school, the racial makeup background of the students at their school are about 70% Asian, most from India and Pakistan. There's about 20% Black or Latino, and they're part of the 10% white. And this was actually a selling point for my husband and I when we were looking at schools for them, because I realized that I didn't have an opportunity to engage in a conversation that was authentic. And what I mean by that is my oldest, he's going into first grade. Last year he came home, his best friend's name is Mahamud, and he said, Mom, Mahamud told me that I can't eat the pepperoni on the pizza. And I said, oh, well, did he say why? Yeah, he said I couldn't eat pork. And I realized his friend Mahamud is Muslim. They don't eat pork. And what it allowed me to do is have an authentic conversation with him about how, well, he's Muslim. They don't eat pork, just like we're Catholic. During Lent, we don't eat meat on Fridays. And we do the same thing in conversations around their Taekwondo teacher who's from South Korea. What I realized is that talking about their experiences made it more natural. And one of the things that really stood out to me, and I have it in this palette of resources I'm going to share with you, was if you've ever heard of Beverly Tatum, she wrote a book. It's called Talking Race with Young Children, and she recently was on a NPR podcast, or an NPR newscast, and she said, there's nothing wrong with observing that somebody's skin is brown any more than it would say so-and-so has blonde hair. It's a physical characteristic, but the question is, what value is being attached to it, or is it being devalued? And that kind of really hit home with me, going, she talks to her children about how their skin is brown because they have more melanin in it. And everybody has some, but you have more, she says to her child. So I realize when we value people's differences, that we're appreciating it. We're talking about their identity, the identity of their skin color, identity of their religion, identity of their hair color. And so I didn't have this opportunity as a child growing up because I was around all white white individuals. And so race was just nothing that we talked about. So it was very hard for me to become comfortable around using vocabulary about talking about race with individuals. And so I wanted to make sure that I was exposing my children to those authentic conversations. And so I decided in college that I would move to Puerto Rico. And that was really a jumping off point for me. I met a good friend, Kimba, and really to this day, I thank her for these opportunities in which she would call out when I was saying something that she felt wasn't correct. I think I remember when she said I used the word they as a collective entity. And she said, well, you referred to they as like an entire Black race. And I didn't even realize what I was saying. It's kind of like when during the protests, I had a friend of mine that said, well, why do they say the system is biased? And I said, well, what do you mean by they? Oh, well, Black people, why do they? And that was that collective they that I had said without even really knowing it when I was in Puerto Rico. And I'm grateful to this day for my friend Kimba, who kind of said, well, Lisa, when you say they, you're referring to a collective group of people, that it isn't the whole race, and it was just simple things like this that I was grateful for friends who pointed out what I was saying subconsciously. And there is in the palette of resources a really cool thing I took called implicit bias. It was developed by students in Harvard University, and you can actually take it online, and it shows you how we all have bias, and implicitly we're making statements. And so I'll show you that resource, and that is one thing that helped me understand where my biases lie implicitly. The next thing I did is I moved to Spain, and I wanted to, my major was in Spanish. And so again, I was exposed to people of a different culture. I remember I joined a rugby team there because I wanted to learn Spanish, and I just in more of a conversational setting. And I remember going to the rugby club, and a 4-year-old coming up to me, asking me something. She spoke English, Spanish, Portuguese, and was learning Italian, and she was 4 years old. And I just remember emphasizing, it opened my eyes to the multicultural and multilingual individuals. And And then really what the point in my professional career was moving to San Antonio. Was the student population of the school I taught in at the time, and this was 20 years ago, was 92% Latino. And so I went in there and I realized that it was the first time that I realized that I was the minority in a group. Because going to Puerto Rico and Spain, you knew you were going to be around individuals of a different culture. But going to San Antonio, I went, wow, I'm look very different than the students I'm teaching. And I realized that I wanted to learn more about their culture, and more about the Latino, mainly they came from Mexico. So when I say Latino, most of them came from Mexico and Puerto Rico. But I realized that I wanted to be able to teach the students effectively and use their culture. And I had to learn a lot about that when I first moved down there. And okay, so this one I'm going to give you a second to read. It's a quote that kind of rings true to me when I talk about this. I'll give you a minute to read it. So what rings strong about this particular quote is that what limits the success of the students that I teach is it may be my knowledge of resources or information to support and scaffold their learning. So if I am uncomfortable with culturally responsive pedagogy, and that's basically teaching the content within the student's culture. And that's Gloria Ladson-Billings, if you've read any of her work, but she's the one who coined the culturally responsive pedagogy. But it's responding to learners' needs while also supporting high expectations, curriculum within their culture. So I realized if we want to respond to our learners and their culture, and we also want to teach about other cultures and race. But if we have a weakness, which I did and still do in that area around the knowledge, curriculum, language, books, then that's going to be reflected in what we teach our students. When we're really passionate about something and we know a lot about it, it is really easy to convey that to individuals. But if we have a lack of knowledge around it, it's going to be harder. And so this was something that I think about was if I'm really, really passionate about something, it's easy to convey it. And if I have a lack of knowledge around it, I just won't approach it. And so that's why this kind of rung true to me when I think about learning more and more and more and just be a constant learner so that I can be a better educator. So I just want to stop really quick and see if there is any questions or comments. I've kind of been talking for a little bit, so I'll just stop and see if anybody had any questions or comments so far. The long wait time, right?
I think everybody is muted, so if someone does have any questions, you might have to put it in the chat.
Oh, yes. Okay. So I then moved to Harlem in 2007. I wanted to gain a teaching and life experience in a different geographic area with students of different racial backgrounds. So I did move to New York City. My first child was actually born in New York City before we moved back to San Antonio. And in New York, I was a school principal. And one thing is I was creating and enforcing policies as a school leader. And so after I left New York, I joined something called the Fisher Fellowship Leadership Program. It's through KIPP Charter Network. And I went through a one-year leadership program with about 14 other school principals, and we worked together to create a new middle school. And we each were going to open up a new middle school. And what we were doing is we had to create a school design plan. And so we were creating policies for this new school that we were creating. And what I realized is that one thing that helped me a lot was that through every time we're thinking about rules we were going to create for the middle school, all of the policies we're going to create, that we did that through the lens of equity. So we looked at it and go, is this policy, is this going to create racial equity, socioeconomic equity, access, opportunity, gender, because there's many different types of equity. And so really putting a rule, right, or a policy, something you're going to enforce through that lens, you really start to dissect what all that means and whether or not you're being equitable. And so that really helped me a lot. And one thing we also used, which I'll share in the Padlet in a minute, is there's a resource we used that, how do you address equity starting in grades K all the way through 12? And it was kind of, what kind of topics do you bring up with a kindergartner? What kind of topics do you bring up with a third grader? And so I'll share that with you. And that's what we started to look at, is through that lens. And it was extremely helpful.
Lisa, I have one
Oh,
quick
yes.
question.
I was just seeing it. Yep.
Yep. And everyone has the ability to unmute themselves to ask a question now too, if they'd like.
So what was it like when you moved to San Antonio? You guys are now the Menard. My first experience, I walked into, it was a grocery store, H-E-B. And I remember thinking that I'm like, I saw like one other white person. It was actually I think when I came back to South Dakota, when I visit, I come to South Dakota 2-3 times a year, and I walk into a store, I think that's when I notice it. I notice I'm the only white person here, or very few, right? And so I think I don't notice as much anymore, but when I first moved to San Antonio, I did realize that that there wasn't very many white people around me. I don't notice it as much anymore, but when I first moved there, it was different. But I loved it. I was learning Spanish, so I got an opportunity to use Spanish everywhere, and so for me it was great. But it was hard. In fact, the group I student taught down there, my undergrad is at the University of Northern Iowa, and we went down there to student teach, and everybody there had to learn how to pronounce Spanish surnames. So, because we had a lot of our students that would be like Juan Hernandez, you didn't want to say Juan or Hernandez. So we learned how to pronounce all of the students' names. Like a common name, first name is Jesus, don't say Jesus, Jesus. But so it was something that that luckily we were equipped to kind of go into a city in which we were the minority. And it's about, the breakdown is about 65-35 there now for the breakdown of, but it was different. It was so this is called, this is something, when I was going through the Fisher Fellowship, this leadership program, we were brought to this attention of this intercultural development continuum, and was really eye-opening for me for this. What this is, and I'll show you another graphic that you might have seen out there today that's very similar to this. But this was basically where one moves in from a monocultural, like one mindset, one culture mindset, to an intercultural mindset. And so when you look at it, you see denial, which means misses difference, right? Now, when you might hear a phrase like, when you realize where one lies, right? We all lie in this continuum somewhere right now. And someone that may lie in the denial stage is one that's, you might hear someone say, well, I didn't grow up with a lot of money, so I don't have white privilege. What's happening is they're missing the difference of what white privilege means, which is just a person who is white who's afforded more opportunities because of their skin color. And so it's missing the difference of what that means. Because there's definitely different privileges, right? Male privilege, right? White privilege, you hear probably more in the current times, you hear white privilege, but that's missing the difference. Now, with polarization, judging the difference, you might hear that as a phrase, everyone's so sensitive nowadays. Why is everyone taking everything so serious? And that's really just kind of going, well, we're polarizing someone who's trying to say, well, it is different for me. And so being in a polarization is you're judging a difference. Minimization, this is where I think I lied most of my young life, is de-emphasizing. That's where, I used to, up until maybe 6 years ago, think that saying I don't see color was something that was good. I'm like, well, I don't want to emphasize the difference. But going back to what I said before, where it's like you want to talk about a difference because it is their identity of someone of a different race or a different hair color, going back to talking about differences, I realized that I was minimizing the differences. Another thing is, you've probably heard a lot about the all lives matter versus Black lives matter, right? And it's not about that we don't care about all lives, but we're emphasizing Black lives right now, just like we would emphasize, emphasize something that is, um, like when you emphasize that you wear pink for recognizing breast cancer, right? We know that a lot of different cancers exist, but we're highlighting breast cancer right now for this month, right? That's kind of like the same thing, is that we're de-emphasizing the difference. And so I kind of lived in this minimization stage for a really long time. Acceptance, you might hear as where you're starting to comprehend the difference. And this is where I started to go when I moved to the different countries and moved to Harlem. I started using phrases like, tell me more. I want to learn more. I started reading more books. I learned about race. I would talk to my friends of different races and say, what are you reading right now? I want to, and just asking, gaining more information. So that's where I still am. I'm in acceptance and adaptation, but really learning more. I am still learning a lot. And I still make a lot of mistakes. But I'm lucky to have friends that will say, when I was talking about, well, I don't see color, this up to like 6 years ago, they're like, well, actually you do want to emphasize their identity of their race. And so I think, like, I was lucky to have friends that pointed that out for me. And then adaptation, of course, is trying to bridge across difference. I love Maya Angelou's phrase, now that I know better, I do better. And I kind of think about that a lot with this. So now the next slide is just looking at this continuum. I'd love to get your thoughts about it. You don't have to say this is where I am, right? Because the important thing is that we're striving to improve so we can change the outcomes for our students, outcomes for ourselves. And so really it's just we're trying to move to the intercultural mindset. So you don't have to say I'm in this stage, but just what are your thoughts about this? So on the next slide here, there's a collaborate board. So what thoughts come to mind when you look at this continuum? Just a question you might have. Again, you are anonymous on this. So as you start to answer the question, it'll come up on the collaborate board. Cool. I like that one where someone said, I've learned that it's okay to ask students about their culture and differences. Yes. And I'm sure who wrote this, you probably noticed their eyes light up, right? The students' eyes light up about, oh, I want to talk about my background, about who I am. I like that one about being honest with yourself. I think that's sometimes a hard one, is acknowledging that you don't know. And I think that's okay. Cool. Good stuff. Okay. Thank you for doing that, everyone. Oh, I just missed one as it came. Now, one book that I read recently, and if you've seen this book or if you've read this book, I'd love to know in the chat if you have. I have it right next to me, actually. Ibram X. Kendi wrote this book called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And the word racist, when I first went this, I'm like, I grew up thinking the word racist was, it was like piercing to the ears to hear that word. And then I read this book. And he actually came to speak on Juneteenth, June 19th, he came to speak to our organization. And he talked about this book, and really, if you have a chance to read any book this year, it was eye-opening. It's so good. He's actually developed an organization on this, and what he talks about is that there is no shared meaning of terms. He said it is so hard for people to talk about race because people don't know the definition of racist or anti-racist or white privilege. And he's like, how can we possibly talk about this if we don't have any shared meaning? And so that was really what has helped with this, and that's his whole, I guess, preface of having this organization is saying we need to be able to talk about it, but we need to know what it means. And so on the next slide, I just shared some of the terms from the book of what he defines. Anti-racist, racist, white privilege. The first definition actually doesn't come from his book. It's a book that comes from Unbound Ed. It's an organization that holds a standards institute a few times a year that helps teachers implement the standards while also talking about cultural relevance and also about equity. But that organization defined the first one. But the rest come from this book, and it's on the next slide. And so what I'd like you to do is just take 2 minutes to read through the definitions and just choose a phrase that stands out to you and why. And if you want, well, I'll give you a second to read it first, and then in the chat, choose a phrase that stands out to you and put it in there, if you will. Equity, good. Now, just to illustrate a couple things, when he talks about be racist and anti-racist in the book, what he says is that one person could actually be a racist one day and an anti-racist the next. Again, sometimes I have to reprogram my mind to use those phrases because when I say them, it sounds like piercing. I guess that's the only thing that I think about. But when he explains it, he says, well, if a racist idea is that one racial group is held inferior or superior more than any other racial group. So you're marginalizing one racist group if an idea exists. If a policy exists that excludes or makes one race inferior than another, that's a racist policy. Now, an anti-racist means that you're trying your best through your actions, that you are trying to make policies where one race is not inferior to the next. And then white privilege, I explained a little bit, and that one comes up a lot. There's another resource I'm going to share with you that you can actually answer these questions about whether or not how privileged you are through your race. And I'll show that to you, that kind of illustrates that a little bit better. But white privilege really is just about the color of your skin. And this document that I will show you will kind of illustrate that. Good. All right. If there's, give everybody about 30 more seconds if they want to choose a phrase or ask a question about any of these. All right, thank you. All right, so I showed you the continuum. This is just another one that is a little more related to not only this book, but when people use the term becoming anti-racist, which means supporting policies and working towards ending policies that marginalize a group. So if you look at the fear zone, if we stay here, we won't change anything, right? If we avoid the hard questions, who wants to feel uncomfortable? Not really anybody. But through that, uncomfortability becomes change. And I talk to others who look and think like me. And some of that is just natural because you're around everybody who looks and thinks like you. Going back to how I said, being in South Dakota, that was all I had was white people who looked and were into the same things I was. But I think striving, reading a lot of books. I didn't have the internet to engage in conversations or in the Padlet I'm going to show you. There's even webinars you can attend for free just to learn a lot more. And so getting out of this fear zone and at least jumping into the learning zone will really help. Recognizing racism exists, seeking out questions that make me uncomfortable. I did that a lot, and I was in uncomfortable situations a lot. Just because even in just the Fisher Fellowship 3 years ago, when I was designing how my school would look and the outline of my school, I had a coworker of mine, Alicia, who just said, if you institute that rule, then you're going to suspend Black students way more than you're going to suspend white students. And so you kind of want to put up the defense, like, but then I just said, can you tell me more? It goes back to that. Can you tell me more why that would do that? And so then she's like, okay, well, here's why, because, and she kind of explained it to me. And I think that the tell me more is really helpful. I want to learn more. Help me, and I think just that helped me in the learning zone is, and also just reading a lot on my own, right? That's why this book is a good starter if you haven't read it yet, because it's super helpful just to learn about vocabulary around it. All right. Okay, so we're going to jump into some resources, and I want to first just I brought up children's books, and I wanted this as its own slide because I think when you want to start talking about race and becoming comfortable about talking about race, children's books is one of the most helpful ways to do it. These are all books I've read my own kids. They absolutely love them. The Rabbit Listened is their favorite. When I Was 8. So these are books that talk about, well, these all are almost about, yes, all of them are mostly about race. There are books of different, when you talk about, if you want to talk about any equity, you want to talk about anything, any differences, whether it's religion or children's books are so easy because it's a story. And then kids naturally ask the questions. When I was 8, about a girl in Alaska who wants to learn how to read, they send her to a private school and the teachers are not very nice to her. It's a true story. Not very nice. And so they make her erase the chalkboard every day. And she reads the chalkboard and she teaches herself how to read as she's erasing it. Right. And so the kids are so, compassionate, right? And so they always want to ask, well, that was mean. And, they start to generate their own questions and they realize that she's being marginalized without actually saying she's being marginalized. So I think and also children's books can be used for middle and high school. I'm telling you, they will love it. So I'm going to show you this Padlet. It's actually on the next, so you'll be able to access it here. Now, you can click within the Padlet right now. So when you click in here, you can actually go up and down. See, I'm scrolling down. This Padlet's kind of arranged like this. But what I would do, I'm going to drop the Padlet link into chat, because when I progress to the next slide, you'll lose this. So this is the one. Let's see. There it is. Okay. Okay, I'm going to put it in the chat so you can actually have it. And so use the one in the chat, because then you can save it and you won't lose it when I go to the next slide. But I just wanted to point out a few, and then I'm going to have you explore. But this, if you look with, let's see, you can see this. Okay, so start within. Implicit bias was the Harvard, put this together. And if you click onto it, it just brings it to you. You can actually take a test for free, and you can take one to see what we all have implicit bias, all races. And so this is a test that we had to take when I joined this leadership program, and we did ours. I believe ours was on, let's see, race. So this race, mainly black and white race, this is the one. It says it requires the ability to distinguish faces of European and African origin, and it indicates that most Americans have an automatic preference for white over black. That includes a black person. When I got my friends that did this that are black, they did this race, and it showed that they had an automatic preference for white. It's very interesting. But you can do one. Those, as some of you said, that you were a lot with the Native American culture. There's one for that as well, Native American here. And it says white and Native American faces in classic or modern dress. The ability to recognize white and Native American faces, the names of places that are either American or foreign in origin. So all of these, you take them, you can, when you click onto it, you can skip through. They kind of ask you some questions like, how warm or cold do you feel towards white people? You answer this. You can actually decline to answer if you want to all the way through, and then it gets you to the actual test. But this one's pretty fun to do. This one here's unpacking the invisible knapsack. So this is about white privilege. This is actually from, I think, 1986 that this was, but it's still used today in a lot of organizations. I did this with about 16 individuals from mostly black and black men and women and white men or women, and we all had to answer this. Like, can I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. You say yes or no. I can avoid spending time with people with whom I was trained to mistrust. If I should need to move, I can pretty sure that I can purchase a house that I can afford and when I want it to live. You answer these questions, and then our professor that was doing this at the time had us all line up based on score. And those that had the most white privilege were white males, then white females, then black females, and then black males, about privilege, just about the skin color. And so it was really interesting to see that. And that is a place that you can start just to see this is what it means. If a traffic cop pulls me over, or if the IRS audits my tax return, I can be sure I haven't been singled out because of my race. And for me, I'm like, yeah, that's true. If I get pulled over, it's probably because I was speeding, right? But my friend, who is a black male, was like, nope, it's because I'm black, he's pulling me over. Right now, that's and for some that is a fear. So it's so this is a good one to look at. And let's see, talking about race. So if you want, oh, you just figured it out. Okay, thanks, Cindy. I just saw that. Difficult. I know, it's the little bar is kind of hidden, right? It's so when you want to start talking to students about race, this is at NPR, Beverly Tatum that you can go to, but I would also look under parent and educator resources. So here are some book lists if you click onto it. And so here, all different categories, you can look through this. And again, when you start reading these, natural conversations are come up. And that's why you don't have to always know all the words to say. When you read the story, it's so helpful. I would start with children's books when you want to introduce a different topic or culture, or talk about something that's in the news today about protests. It says sometimes, where did that one go? The one I had, sometimes we march, or sometimes they march, or sometimes people march, sorry. That one was great. My students, or my kids, I'm sorry, we keep the news off, but they did see marches and protests and stuff. And so we got that book from the library, and we talked about why people do marches and protests. And I didn't have to know tons of background information. And so that's why books are a good place to start. The document I was telling you about, the anti-biased framework, this here has right here. So here are, if you want, when you talk about equity, this is from Teaching Tolerance, if you've heard of that site. This starts in kindergarten. I know and like who I am, and I can talk about my family and name some of my group identities. So that's kindergarten. So this is a really good framework to start with. Well, where do I start with my students just talking about race or talking about equity? You can just use these. They even give you little scenarios, and it goes all the way up to 12th grade. So you can, I'm aware that biased words and behaviors and unjust practices and laws limit the rights and freedoms of people based on their identity groups. So that's something that is done. This one's 6th grade, 6th or 8th grade. So that is a really good place. And I always hesitate to put too much information on the Padlets, because sometimes that can drive people to inaction when it's too overwhelming, right? So I just say what I want you to do. Now, did everybody get a chance to click this off of the Nearpod, take the bit.ly link and put it into their own tab? I guess you can't really, you're muted, but what I'll do is I'm going to advance to the next slide, because this is what I'd really like you to do is take some time and find 3 resources you want to explore on your own or use with your own children or students. So I want to give you some time to look through it and see, well, what are 3 that beyond today I'm going to look and use, in the fall semester or in the first 2 months of school. Kind of, commit to something that you want to learn more about. Now, you can do it in the sense that you can start within. You could go, I'm going to read the book on how to be anti-racist, or I'm going to look through these racial terms, and this is another good one where I kind of go, well, this is what this term means, right? The other one is you could look through other things in the parent educator resources. There is a podcast called Nice White Parents. My friend just told me about this. He's going to do this. I think it comes out, July 30th. And it's a podcast. It's from the New York Times, and it's about right here. And it's just about equal education, and so I haven't. I put it on here because it's just starting, but they've also done a similar podcast elsewhere. This is Children Movie Reviews. The political parents, they take movies and they look at it through the lens of equity. And so a common one they did, kid movies. Let's see, this one's kind of neat. This one has Inside Out, Zootopia. And what they do is they'll go through their summary and they'll ask questions like, what are the themes? How is it representing gender in the movie? How is it representing race in the movie? And then they have a 6-year-old and they ask questions, direct, answers from their 6-year-old. So that's a That's kind of a cool one. I do that because my kids watch a lot of movies, and I kind of just want to see what themes are represented with gender and race. And so that's a good one. And then, oh, good part related to race and equity. I do. I don't have them all on here. Cindy asked, any recommendations related to race and equity? But I can, um, there's a shared Google Drive where I dropped this Padlet into with my session, and I can drop some more ones, or I can actually add them directly here for some more podcasts related to race and equity. I've gotten really into podcasts lately. They're fun. I feel like I'm late on that train, but Embrace Race is another one. Um, and this has 20 picture books for 2020, Readings to Embrace Race, fantastic read aloud books for raising a brave generation. And that's under the Parent Educator Resources. Here's webinars. Actually, that might be something too. Oh, yeah. And even though it says for kids, I watch these a lot because I think they're great. And let's see. And these are just, there was one more that I wanted to point out. Maybe it's in here. Oh, yes, under Start Within, and this is just a way to kind of learn a little bit more about how to talk about race and equity. Down at the very bottom, it's called Inclusive Language Guide. And this is, it gives an identity and an example. So it'll say, you know, do we use the term Black or do we use the term African American? And it gives an explanation. This, I wish I would have found this years ago, because I was confused about, when I first moved to San Antonio, do I say Hispanic? Do I say Latino? Do I say Mexican? And so really I wasn't sure, and I was really ignorant on what to say. And this kind of, here it is, Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, you hear this? Hispanic refers to people from Spanish speaking countries. Latino is a person of Latin American descent, can be of any background or language. So this is, so when we go Native Americans are preferred unless the individual group specifies otherwise. The term Indian is used only when referring to people from India, not for Native Americans. So it's, this is helpful in this recently. Another one that recently came up is I was engaged in a conversation with somebody a few months ago, and I said people of color, and they said, you can't say that. And then you look on here and it's like, do not use the term colored people. But people of color, or POC, you might see as the acronym, is something that, you know, do not use the term minority to refer to individual students from diverse racial ethnic backgrounds. Instead, use people of color or students of color. So this is really helpful if you want to dive in a little bit more about what's appropriate, or what's politically correct. All right, I will stop talking. So so if you, we're going to be running out of time before we can really have a chance to respond. But if you will just take a couple minutes, if you can, and just, what are 3 things that you see in this Padlet? Maybe they're ones that I went over that you would want to explore on your own. I think sometimes writing down what you're going to do and kind of committing to it, you're kind of giving a promise to yourself that, hey, I'm going to check this out after today. If you don't have a chance, I have my email right here too, that I'd love to hear you know, what you want to read from this Padlet. I'd love to hear if there's anything you want me to add to the Padlet. It is something I created for this presentation, but it is something that I want to continue because I do work with educators nationwide, and I'd love to be able to add resources to this, create different columns. So if there's anything that I didn't go over, something that would benefit you, I'd love to hear from you in your email, sorry, to my email about what you'd like. And I do have that podcast on race and equity. That would be a good one. I do have a couple ideas and I don't remember the name, but I'll add them. But I do want to see. But some people have shared. So one idea here, that one person shared. They're going to do the implicit, take the test, read the book, and listen to Nice White Parents. Yes, I am going to, on my walks, listen to that. And another person said that they're going to, oops, do the inclusive language guide. Another one to share is read How to Be Anti-Racist, search for podcasts, take the test for white privilege, possibly share with, yes. That is such a good, that was an eye-opener one. And the one that I have on here you can use, but I think there also might be an online one, or one where they actually have the scores that you add up that you can take. And so it will show you that too. And let's see, another one. Oh, sorry, I shared that one. That one's on there. All right, very good ones. The movies, I teach music appreciation. Oh, that would be a great one. That's a good idea. Oh, good. Hey, thanks for those, Laura. I'm going to save those on here. There's so many good ones out there now, right? Thank you. Always looking for new ideas, new things to read. Oh, Peter Pan. I've had the movie discussion. Oh, cool. That's cool. All right, so I know it is at time. And so here is my email address. Love to hear more. If you have more resources, I did save those from there. Oh yes, The Hate U Give. Sorry, I get sidetracked. These are good ideas. But yeah, anything else, if you could email me, it'd be great. Thank you so much for listening. I'm very much still learning a lot, but I just wanted to share where I started and kind of where I am now and where I'm really hoping to go and get better at again, changing the outcomes for our students, for my own kids. And so thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Have fun with the rest of your sessions today.